Thank you, Arno, and greetings and good morning to all of you, the participants. Of course, this is always handy to invite the project officer to to speak first in a project final conference, and this is very welcome. But actually, I do think that we had a really good cooperation, in particular with Vlasis, who was the coordinator of the POLIMP project. And I really want to congratulate you, all of you who took part in this project, the partners, the whole consortium, also the stakeholders and the experts who were involved, because you really did a great job, I think. This was not a research project, but what we call a cooperation and support action, which was meant to mobilize, as you said, to mobilize knowledge, to raise awareness, to connect different actors across the spectrum of climate action. And I think you really did a really good job in that regard. You used the traditional means, conferences, publications, workshop, policy briefs, but also you ventured into kind of new areas of information spreading, like webinars. You created this climate policy information hub, which is, I think, a great and credible source of information for practitioners and for non-practitioners as well on climate on climate policy, and knowing that how difficult it is to break through with information in today's world, which is dumped with information from all different sources, which sources are sometimes obscure or not credible, or we just simply don't know them. So it's difficult to get attention, and this conference with such a nice audience also proves your capacity to reach out people and to raise interest in your activities and in climate action. And I think that was a great value, and this really meets the purpose of the project that we had in mind in the European Commission when we conceived and when we invited proposals for this particular issue. The good thing is that there will be a succession to POLIMP, and there are even some overlaps in between the consortium members. This project, which is already ongoing, is called Charisma, and there is, as far as I know, a transition going on to not to let down or to not to let lost all those information and knowledge that was created thanks to POLIMP, and they will take over and they will provide also continuation for this climate policy information hub, our web platform. And I think this is really a good example of how to ensure the sustainability of EU-funded projects, which is always a challenge from our point of view. We know very well that when you have funding for a given period of time, it's very difficult to maintain the enthusiasm and the following that source of income or money or funding has expired. So I think even in this regard, this is a success story. Going a bit to the substance of my introductory speech is actually quite nicely linking here to this introductory words, because post-Paris, knowledge management, knowledge mobilization, awareness raising, the raising of public acceptance, and eventually public mobilization will be more crucial than any time before. Paris in itself, I think, was already a success of science. It wasn't only a political success, although of course the fact that we have finally a global and in some parts legally binding agreement, that's an enormous political achievement. However, all this climate discussion has started from science, from propositions from science, and the fact that it could raise over time and to reach the highest levels of politics and bring the global community together and its leaders to agree upon action. I think this is a really considerable success for science itself. However, science, I think, will have a rather different or partly different role post-Paris, because until the question is over, I think, for most of the minds, whether climate change is taking place. Now the consensus is really wide that that climate change is upon us, and it will have an impact on our lives, even in our lifetime. So we are not only talking about our children or our children's children, but we are also talking about our lives. And the Paris Agreement means that the time for global action has come, and there is a political pledge to act. However, the complexity of the affair is so great that it's very difficult to act in a reasonable manner and in a consistent manner. It requires a lot of resources, a lot of money. It implies obviously enormous changes in the way we're living, in the ways we produce energy, we move goods and persons around. So the societal impacts of climate action itself. So it's not only we don't only talk about the impact of climate change, but the impact of climate action as well. It can go wrong or it can go right. The pathways are not prescribed in this regard, and science must inform decision makers, policy makers, but it also has to inform more than before eventually the public, because the public as employers or employees will be affected by climate action. And in democratic settings, especially like in Europe, we need the support of public for public action, for public policies. And this needs a very wide understanding of this very complex issue. That's why we are using enormous resources today for benefits and goods that may only produce in the future or that may not produce ever. And this is a very critical issue, and this must be explored with the help of science. So linking, and I think this will be one statement or point here is. Until now, I think we have been also in the Commission rather successful in linking science with policy. And there were, I think, some criticism, especially and skepticism in the circles of science as well, who might have often preferred to stay in their own realms and discuss science with scientists. However, due to the societal challenge I've just described and you are very well aware of, this discussion have been brought outside of the circles of science and to inform and to engage with policymakers. I think that this discussion has to be enlarged even further and very soon, and it's being enlarged even today towards other segments of the society, with special regard to the different economic actors and the different sectorial interests and interest representations and knowledge carriers and knowledge providers. Eventually, and which is, I think, a very interesting link, the research bodies and entities that are fed by businesses, especially, of course, the great, the big corporations. They do have their own research entities that provide research for the specific needs in the different sectors, and linking the more academic, less partial research activity with those. I think it's a very interesting and critical field of cooperation in the future. In practical terms, what speaks for this, what's cause for such kind of activities are the INDCs, the intended nationally determined actions, or that should become over time nationally determined actions, which are the pledges of the parties of the UN Convention for Climate Change to act, to do things on national on national level. We know that these pledges are not enough to meet the long-term goal of the UNFCCC, that well below 2 Celsius degree world by the end of the century, and how to raise ambition and how to close this gap by meaningful action. This must be informed by science. Another point is that, of course, resources are very scarce. Resources that are disponible for the at the disponibility of the policymakers and businesses. While there are a lot of other challenges as well we are facing, obviously. The sustainable development goals that have been agreed also last year in a very important summit in Addis Ababa. They also call for global action, and climate change is obviously one of those. And we and the international community and our policymakers and ourselves have to act in a consistent way, that we are pursuing very different goals and very and parallel objectives. Climate is one of them, but we can of course mention food security, energy poverty or addressing energy poverty, water scarcity, etc. These fields of intervention, they overlap. One action may influence the other. So the research into these nexus relationships in the coming decades and in the coming years specifically will be very important. As a third element to this thinking on the streams of future research is linked to integrating the different elements of climate research a bit further, especially the policy-related research. Mitigation, adaptation, climate impact research went on their parallel ways, very often till today. And I think since the overall impact will be the outcome and the interplay, the result of the interplay of action in these different dimensions, an integrated approach, an integrated scientific approach to mitigation, adaptation, and climate impact research will be critical. As a fourth element to this thinking, I would mention, of course, contributions to the IPCC's sixth assessment report. The sixth assessment report will be a key document that will inform the global stocktake that will take place under the UNFCCC around 2023, which is meant to overview the global action along the lines put forward in the Paris Agreement and in the INDCs. The Paris Agreement calls for that this global stocktakes is science-based or science-informed, and the IPCC's work will be a very important source of information and a reference document for that regard. So we have to make sure that in the coming years we do finance and we do carry out research that can feed into the IPCC's processes and assessment activities. A particular segment of this work will be, of course, the 1.5 special report that was very specifically invited by the UNFCCC parties, which was kind of unusual compared to the practices of the past. This was a very direct invitation and setting of the IPCC's work. That IPCC has recently actually endorsed this invitation. They didn't have many choices, I guess, but they did so. We know that there are important knowledge gaps in this field that has been not deeply researched in terms of impacts and what mitigation action is needed to keep warming below 1.5 or at 1.5 Celsius degree. And the time frame is very short. The UNFCCC expected this report by the end of 2018. So also in our research activities that are financed by the European Commission, we requested our projects to exploit their ongoing activities, their ongoing research activities and results in a way that they can produce meaningful results that can feed into that discussion. This brings me actually to say a few words about how we see our activities in the European Commission DG Research in the coming few years. Actually, all these things that I just set out characterized a bit already our thinking. In the past 1-2 years, we tried to figure out that what will be needed if there is a global agreement on the one hand. On the other hand, here in Europe, the landscape, the policy landscape was a bit clearer. at least the political consensus around the need for climate action in Europe has been already there for some time. We can even mention a decade. It's not to say that there are no differences and eventually cleavages with regard to what kind of climate action or climate policy should be run by the European Union, but there is a kind of both political and public understanding and acceptance in Europe that we do need a rather stringent climate policy in Europe. So that has already framed our research activities and the topics that we thought we should support as a public funder. So correspondingly, we'll have three main fields of activities. One is directly related to decarbonization, and this is a strand where we have been already on for a few years, because mitigation will remain key. You know very well that the adaptation has its limits, and mitigation action now today and the strong mitigation action is critical to prevent dangerous climate change and preventing the acceleration of the climate impacts in the course of this century. So research must focus on mitigation. We cannot lean back that and whatever happens we can adapt to, because we will not be able to adapt to. The second stream of action will be and is climate research into climate services, products, how to best stimulate the emergence of a market that can provide services for decision makers, for policy makers, for citizens to deal with, to address those impacts of climate change that are affecting their lives and their economic activities. And the third strand is research into the Arctic, which is a climate change hotspot. Is a very particular landscape with particularly effects of climate change, which trigger global changes. Actually, saying a few more details on the first trend, to which this project POLIMP is contributing significantly as well. I think in the future, climate policy research will have to do more with terms of sectoral research, bringing in the sectoral aspect, and POLIMP has already did excellent work, I think, in this regard. When I took over as a project officer, one of the first meetings I attended was on the ETS, the European Stakeholder Perspectives on ETS. This was in this very room, I think, and that was honestly a very revelatory meeting, even for myself, and I think for all the colleagues who were involved in the different sides, because it brought together different stakeholder interests in the European EU emission trading scheme debate. We had national governmental interest represented here, some different business interests. We have the scientists, and it really triggered a very hot debate that sometimes even looked to be going out of control. Sometimes, or at least that was my impression. However, the frames remain decent, and I think it brought lot of knowledge to all of us that how these interactions can be difficult actually, and how maintaining such a dialogue can be difficult, but how important it is to understand each other's point of views and interests and perspectives and voila. So this will be very important to continue on, and very specifically where we want to give incentives is to bring these different communities together and draw European pathway, realistic mitigation pathway designs together, because the upcoming period of the beginning of the 2020s will be critical for drafting the new legislations, climate legislations post-2030. And this is a really important period to break the trend globally. I mean, in Europe, we have already broken the trend of we switched to lower emission pathways, but this must go deeper even in Europe in order to keep the accumulated emission levels within the limits needed for staying on a pathway that is consistent with the 2 degree target. So the stringency of European climate action also must increase in the period of 2030-2040. And this is not sure, even if you take a look at the state of the EU ETS today, this is not guaranteed that we will have the political support for that. And we need research that provides the tools, the mitigation options, and also the information and knowledge mobilization that is needed for such action. So this will be, I think, very, very critical. We try to support that, but for that we will need such kind of projects and people and stakeholders like those who were involved in the POLIMP project to go on. That's what I wanted to say for for the introduction. And any questions or discussions later on as well, I'm very happy to engage.
Thank you very much, Peter.